Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I am Deb Philman, your host. And today I am joined by Tony Kinnett. Did I say it right? Kinnett?
Absolutely. Yep. You're right on the head.
Yes. Awesome. And Tony's going to tell us all about himself and some recent goings on in his life as a public education administrator in the Indianapolis area. But before we get started, I would like to ask you please to like this video, share this video, this live stream with others so they can join us live, ask their questions live, etc. The replay will be up immediately afterwards, but it's always great to ask questions and be part of the conversation. Also, if you like this sort of content, please consider subscribing to the channel. I cover all things related to education in America, and I maintain a locals community at thereasonwelearn.locals.com, where you can interact with me twice a week on a private Zoom call if you're a subscriber. So without further ado, welcome, Tony.
My name is Tony Kinnett. I am the science coach coordinator for the Indianapolis public school system. And I'm also the co-founder and owner of the Chalkboard Review, which is a publication that aims to give all teachers a voice in education that would normally perhaps be obscured or told they can't write for them because their views basically aren't left enough. And we also host a lot of excellent parents and other community members as well. So that's kind of what I'm up to there. This week has been pretty crazy and pretty wild. But I think some good things will come out of it.
I think so too. And have you had any pushback on the job from just doing that, from just being a conservative education journalist?
Oh yeah, I've had 2 HR meetings that I've been dragged into that have been pretty great. They're always very, very, very quick to stress that they're not disciplinary, but they just want to let me know that a lot of my coworkers were very uncomfortable with me being a conservative on the field. So I was called in after Rush Limbaugh passed away. I sent out a tweet that said I was thankful for Rush Limbaugh and the work that he did for independent journalists, basically making independent journalism a thing.
Right.
And that was considered by a colleague of mine very racist, very terrible. And so he wrote a lot of angry emails about me that called me some very interesting things, accused me of, and I quote, wanting to own his black body. A little wild. And I was pulled into an HR meeting where they told me that he was very brave for coming forward and that they couldn't police my tweets, but I should be aware going forward that as a leader in the district, that my coworkers might not like the kind of things that I was saying. So I kept doing the exact same thing that I'd been doing and just kind of disregarded it. After the Washington Free Beacon interviewed me about basically getting my master's degree programs from Ball State and the very leftist master's degree programs that exist in education, they got mad again, and they didn't like that I was speaking to news organizations. And I continued doing what I'm doing. So yeah, I've gotten some pushback for being a conservative. I've gotten some angry emails from staff before. One was very upset that I was tweeting about Israel and Palestine. One was really upset that I existed and said some very interesting things about my color. But I mean, she's allowed to say that because her demographic is allowed to say, whatever in our district and get away with it. So yeah. That's kind of.
I was about to ask, do you get to go into HR and say, pretty much everything they say to me is threatening? And
no, goodness gracious. I had considering the whole thing that happened this last week, I had a message from a teacher and that was one of my science teachers. And they started off by saying, well, you haven't been in my classroom. And I'm like, I've got 286 teachers. Like, give me a break. But he was very mad. And then he asked, well, if what they're teaching is so wrong, why didn't you report it? And I'm like, report them teaching critical race theory to the Racial Equity Office who told them to teach it? Are you serious right now? Like, get out of here. So yeah, taking me seriously is never been necessarily the strong suit of these kind of organizations.
Wow. And yet you do it. What drew you into this line of work in the first place way back when?
Oh boy. So when I was in college, I went to a small Christian university in Wisconsin after turning down a commission to West Point. And I had a good time getting education, loved teaching. And at the end of my senior year, I actually left to go be Governor Scott Walker's junior education policy advisor. I started out as an internship, eventually progressed to being an education policy advisor. And I loved it. I loved education policy. So much fun. And I actually sat in on a lot of Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings classes kind of in an auditing sense. And I would listen to the things that she taught and that she said. I was very interested in the socioeconomic understanding of education because I didn't agree with them, but I was taught by my professors that if you disagree with someone, you better learn their argument better than they know it. And so came back to Indiana. And have you ever seen the movie Hoosiers by chance? Yes. So that's the school that I started teaching at my first couple years in Indiana, and loved it. Teacher of the year first 2 years, and got my master's degrees. And man, those were just a waste of money. And that's kind of what got me into writing for political commentary. So writing for different organizations, Washington Examiner, Daily Caller, FEE, now National Review, and just kind of getting in there and really making headway. Long story short, now I'm at the Indianapolis public school system. I'm kind of the quote unquote director of science. All 31,000 kids get their science from me. And the teachers are supposed to teach science in the way that I suggest. That doesn't happen. And that's kind of how we are where we are. That's kind of how I got to being here.
Right. Now you say that doesn't happen. And is that just willful? They're just willfully disregarding what you're telling them they need to do? Or is it just too hard to police it and they're doing their thing?
That, and I would say that another huge factor is that the district has two strategic priorities. One of the strategic priority is racial equity. And through their strategic priority for racial equity, they encourage teachers to do a whole host of things, including teaching students differently based on their color and all of these other very horrific things that I ended up outlining in that video that I released on Twitter. Right. And well, actually I had released a month ago in a report for the Daily Caller, but it didn't really get traction until I'd finally had enough and made the video. A lot of teachers just follow what the district professional development and racial equity stuff is kind of pumped to them. It's a path of least resistance.
Right.
There are a large number, though, that do believe it. And so they just kind of ignore some things that I suggest. But I also try not to point my nose in every single teacher's classroom. I believe agency in many cases is the best way to provide students with a good education. I'm a freedom lover. What can I say?
Well, no, I mean, I agree with that. And it's sort of funny you mention it because forever I've been saying that teachers need to be treated more like professionals, and then they will be professionals. In other words, if you don't micromanage everything they do, and you might attract people who want to be creative and want to be responsible about their teaching. And for too long, it's been like, print these out and go to this website and, really prescriptive. And on the other side, on the other hand, a lot of parents are saying, but Deb, they're closing the door and politicizing the classroom. So, it's a double-edged sword. We want them to be more independent and not have the principal or the superintendent or the curriculum director breathing down their neck. But the classroom is not their personal playground either for their politics. And somehow, like, the sweet spot is somewhere in between. And I think what I'm seeing is where it's a bad combination of both. In other words, you have top-down curriculum requirements that include things like an equity plan and that some of the things you're talking about that must be done, or gender policy that must be taught, like in every discipline in the district. Doesn't matter what class it is, not just health. And the teacher can't opt out. I mean, in Jersey, for example, they can't opt out. They must teach it, even if it contradicts their values. And then you have, on the other hand, teachers are just like, I put up the picture of Chairman Mao and I don't really care. So, and as you say, you can't get to 200 plus classrooms even in a year. That's a lot to ask.
It's really interesting that in the place where we are right now, there used to be kind of an unspoken shared code between teachers that you didn't get political in the classroom because it wasn't your place. Right. Also, people just used to be a lot less concerned about their fellow man's politics. This used to be something that kind of formed in the United States, and then Berkeley happened. And then kind of the fallout from Berkeley, and where everyone is like, well, my politics are my identity, and you just need to accept that. Well, then those people get in the classroom and they want all of their students to know that their politics are their identity. And also, people who are well-fed love to preen. I like to poke fun at mommy teachers who have enough money, they have enough friends, they have enough, fill in the blank. So they need something to advocate for, so they have moral worth. And so what they'll do is they'll come into class and they'll advocate so that everyone will like them. Their students will like them. They'll be heroes. They'll be just like that one teacher they saw in the Hallmark movie, and everyone will clap. And I call those mommy teachers really one of the plagues of modern education. So they're found most often in elementary classrooms and in high school English courses. Those are usually where they boil down to.
Right. It's unfortunate because I might have been one of those at one point in time, meaning like, I went into teaching and I also hope to have a family. So I might have been a mom and a teacher, but I thought it was going to be a career. I thought it would be like, this is what I'll do for my career. Other people go work in an office. I'll be a teacher. And I left teaching because I encountered people like you just described.
Some teachers that I knew that I disagreed with personally, philosophically, and they were fine because they just let kids be kids. They taught
Mhm.
their class and then they called it a day. I did have a couple of teachers that I couldn't stand,
Right.
that I knew in other districts that made their politics, their personality, and part of their class. And I just don't think that's. I just don't think that's. I don't think there's any place for that. Period.
Right.
And
Right.
so, yeah, I'm just not enthused by it. I'm quite tired with all of the preening and posturing. It's like, yeah, seeing one peacock ruffle its feathers is kind of interesting, but after you see 1,000 peacocks rustling their feathers, it's like, okay, are you guys done?
Well, and especially when you realize they have impressionable children
Right,
under
right.
their sway. It's like, it's one thing if you were just preening around the park,
Mhm.
but you're not only caring for other people's children and affecting what they learn or don't learn and what they think or don't think, but you're getting paid taxpayer dollars to do it,
Yeah, so this is
which
my
is especially galling.
this is where I think that people who want federal and state bans on certain kinds of curriculum, this is where I think the argument is best used. Now, I don't personally think that's the best solution. However, I think that this is where the best argument lies, is saying that, well, look, taxpayer dollars are here. They're going into this. I don't want my kids learning something on my taxpayer dime that I disagree with. I think that's fair. This is why I'm really a huge proponent for school choice. And I think that kids should go where their parents want them to go. And that's why I think that a lot of restrictions on schools, et cetera, should be deregulated, so that there could be more school options for kids. Because again, wherever the parent is, I really want the parent to have the values that they uphold at home upheld.
Right.
And if they don't think that the school is the best place to do it, then they should be able to send their kids somewhere else.
And what do you say to the people who say, well, but then they won't learn the values of a liberal democracy because
Bull
their
crap.
parents, blah, 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 blah.
That is pristine fresh bull crap. Show me the
Right.
data. Show me the
Right.
data. This is the same people that are like, well, religious schools are just going to indoctrinate your kids and they're going to leave and they're because whatever. Okay, data. I need data. Um, Preening that, oh, well, if I don't, I mean, I was just having a conversation, earlier today that's like, well, if I homeschool my kid, then they'll be socially stunted. Show me the data. If I don't give my kid an iPad, then they won't know how to use computers. Show me the data. There is none. Because there's none, I can't support it. I mean,
Right.
yeah, I think that some of those suggestions are silly as it is, but that's become my response, lady. Where's the data?
It's a good response until you come up against looking for objective data is so white. And you know what I mean? That's their new thing. They say, objectivity and the scientific method are, the white man's tools. So we don't use them. And it's very convenient, isn't it? I don't have to show you the data because the data is white.
So there's a very interesting thing they do in a lot of racial equity meetings and training. So I had to sit through racial equity training with the Racial Equity Institute out of the Carolinas, and they're a clown organization, and very racist and very disgusting. But they came out and they did our little presentation, and they kind of want to appease people that may find what they're saying a lot of garbage. So they'll say, well, we have data here. We actually have some things that really play in and actually prove what we're saying. And they show you these graphs, and they're called perceived outcome graphs. And so they'll show you this graph of like Black people going to the DMV. And they'll say, see, 92% of Black people said they had a bad experience when they went to the DMV. Therefore, the DMV is racist. And it's like, wait, who's going to the DMV and having a positive experience anywhere? Like, show me the people that are like, I can't wait to go to the DMV this afternoon. What? Like, no.
Yeah.
So
It's
I mean,
pretty awful no matter who you are.
and that's what those meetings are like. And so the perceived outcome graphs and data, they don't actually have data that suggest it, or they'll take statistical data. So, for example, the school to prison pipeline is a classic example of critical race theory in education. They're saying that, well, schools are systemically racist because if a Black student gets suspended and expelled in middle school and high school for, let's say, stabbing someone, that's something that a lot of students are getting suspended for in Indianapolis right now, for blunt weapon attacks, then he's very likely to be in prison later. So that means that schools must be upholding systemic injustice, and they're sending kids to prison because they're Black. No, it just so happens
stabbing someone
stabbing someone lands you in prison. I mean, I know. And also, if you look at the graph, white students who stab kids will also end up in prison later. And like, it's the exact same trend of data, but the larger the populace gets, the smaller the percentage gets. So like, it's like a percentage of society. So let's say we have 100 students, and you have a certain number of students that stab them. If you then take a group of 1,000 of the same demographic, the number of students who stab another will be less. That's like how statistical approximation works. The bigger your control group, the smaller the outlier becomes.
Right.
And so what they'll do is they'll say, well, white people are 13% likely to end up in prison, but black people are 18% likely to end up in prison. So that's bad. And it's like, well, no, that doesn't follow statistical analysis and philosophy. So it's a lot of like manipulation of the data and the graphs and how we talk about this that provides the critical race theory its evidence and narrative. It's one huge circular reasoning narrative. And it's, first of all, it's infuriating. Second of all, it's embarrassing. And third of all, it's incredibly condescending and very bigoted towards our Black and Hispanic children, because we're telling them that they don't have a chance in the world and therefore they need all these extra helps because, well, they're Black, they couldn't handle it, whatever. And it's so sad.
Exactly. And they, especially the part about, well, let's take these statistics. And then they want to say like, well, we don't really need to worry as much about math as far as getting the right answer. We just need them to, just know how they got their answer. That's what's important.
Ethno Mathematics is my favorite thing right now. I love it so much because I love making fun of people who believe in ethno mathematics, which is the idea that straight white men have controlled math for so long and that we've built it. And so therefore it's bad. And it's like, well, first of all, that's not true. We're using Arabic numerals. We're using Indian and Middle Eastern geometry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But no, just because 2 + 2 = 4 does not mean that math is racist. It doesn't mean that statistics are racist. It doesn't mean that, multiplication tables are racist and that we should actually spend time preening about how the Aztecs also invented circles. That's a waste of kids' time.
Right. And that, well, they're like, you're bringing up two issues I want to get to. Let's see, in order. One, the achievement gap by race. I've said that is another one of those examples where like, well, let's see, you're hiding the high flyers who are brown in this pile. And you're like, because again, we have the bigger sample group on the, with the white kids, you're not really observing how not well they're doing. Right? Because there's more of them. So this bar is going to be taller than this bar, no matter what you do. Right.
So my statement to this is that if you look at cultural and socioeconomic charts of the same data, you get much more correlation than Black and brown student data.
Yes.
So if you take a group of white students and a group of Black students and a group of, I think brown is a very interesting way to categorize a huge group of cultures and individuals. But if you take a lot of white people and people of color and you put them in a room and you have them take a test and you say, oh, see, look here, the white students are scoring higher on the test. I have a very significant problem with that, because then when you actually take the test data and you look at socioeconomics, you find that the low income students across every factor did a worse job, most likely because of factors of their childhood, nature versus nurture, etc. I just am not part of the crowd that thinks that someone's culture should be equated to their color. You take a wealthy young Black man from the Northeast that grew up in a 2-parent household, he's more than likely going to score higher than the Asian child who grew up with one parent in the LA, in one of the eastern slums of LA. So it's not actually about the racial hierarchy as much as it is about the cultural and socioeconomic factors that go into raising and rearing a child.
Right. And we're expressly not allowed to talk about those, because then we might actually discover the truth, right? I mean, we're told if we bring that up, then we're racist, when in point of fact, that's just because I think they don't want us to discover the grift. That's my opinion. Now, you hinted at the representative diversity a minute ago when you talked about how, the Aztecs also invented circles and those kinds of ideas. And that drives me absolutely crazy. I think I've heard so many stories. I mean, Maya Angelou told a story of how there was, she had no books. So she went to the library and read every single book in the library. And because she didn't know who the person was who wrote some things that she read as a young child, she actually thought some of them might have been written by a young Black girl, but it was actually William Shakespeare. But in other words, she related so much to what she was reading that it didn't matter who wrote it. It's like, oh, I was surprised to find out it was a white man from, hundreds of years ago. And yet we're told by Dr. Billings, that they have to see themselves in the curriculum. They must see themselves in the literature. They must see themselves in the math. They must see themselves in the science, or they won't learn it and their self-esteem will suffer.
I have a
And
significant issue with telling a child or framing a child that if I don't see someone with my skin color, if I don't see someone with my genitals doing something, then I'm never going to be able to aspire to be one. The most of my teachers were female, a lot of them. I still went into education and did fairly well for myself. I never thought, oh, I really wish there were more male teachers here so that I would feel represented. In my office, I am one of like 3 or 4 men out of like 30 women. That doesn't bother me. Just, I mean, those people were interested and they went into that particular field. Big deal. I mean, but a lot of people get really upset. And this isn't even something that I've talked to in a lot of conversations, like with individuals of the Hispanic community. They genuinely don't care that a lot of people around them happen to be white or black. They don't care. They're people to them because from many of their backgrounds and environments, a lot of people who were culturally Hispanic had a lot of different skin tones and facial structures.
Yep.
And realistically, it's more about identifying with cultural norms and values than it is about identifying color.
Right.
I like authors not because of the color of their skin or the genitals in their pants. I'm much more interested in, do I agree with them philosophically? Am I annoyed by little political quips they make in their writing? How do they talk about quote unquote flyover country, which is where I'm in, which I hear quite often, even people that I agree with. Today, I was listening to a Twitter space with a lot of really great school choice advocates. And when he started using examples, all of the city examples he gave were in California. And I was like, I don't really agree with that. But I'd say, again, that's another issue of something being more cultural and experiential than color-based.
Right. Which just highlights how absurd it is that we have such a centrally planned public school system in the first place, from the federal all the way down. What do you think about that? I mean, I kind of know your answer, but maybe the audience doesn't.
I think that it really should be more the ground up. I think that public infrastructure can have some good things to it. For example, here where I am in the particular town I'm in Indiana, there is a public school, there is a small Catholic school, and there is nothing else. If school choice legislation universally passed tomorrow, and for some whatever reason we shut down the public school, there would be no place for kids to go to school. That's not right. I do think that there should be an infrastructure in place for education to take place. That said, the federal Department of Education is garbage. A lot of state education departments are complete bureaucratic nightmares. Teacher licensure, building licensure, and regulation keep all of the standards ridiculously high and for pointless reasons. So really, I think that American public education has become rather cancerous, and it's starting rotting from the inside. And I was speaking with someone about this recently in regards to public education. No one is currently defending the status quo. The left and the progressives really want to take it in one direction, and right, independents and moderates really want to take it in another direction. No one's defending the status quo, which were actually Bushian Republicans were the people who defended the status quo for a really long time. So like before Jeb Bush got on the school choice train, it was really all about upholding like the public sector, and like a lot of Rust Belt, like moderate blue Democrats did the same. That was the one bipartisan part of education. So now that we're here, no one's defending the status quo. So it's going to fall apart. And I think it's a good thing. What I think the conservatives need to do is start advocating for what does it look like on the other side? Because right now we're just saying school choice, school choice, school choice. But no one actually writes down what we want education to look like on the other side. Daniel Buck and I wrote about this for the National Review.
Right. And I mean, I come at it from the outside, on the parent side, asking parents to consider what they wanted for their children when they had children. Like, why did you have these children? And what was the project you were working on when you had them in terms of their lives, right? So whatever portion of that was values education, whatever portion of that was hopes for their future in terms of their capacity to choose their own path, economically or even experientially, whatever it is, education is how they're going to how you're going to help them, complete that project. It's not something the state tells you have to have. Like, in other words, step back from that paradigm, and as much as you can, don't think about, state standards and all those kind of things. Just think about your children your life, their life, the life you want to have as a family, what you'd like them to be, have, what doors you would like to be open to them, and so
Right.
forth, which you may not know when they're real little, but you can dream. And then you backfill that. I find that we're taking these little children and we're just kind of seeing it as normal to drop them off and let a bunch of other unelected bureaucrats, we don't know, total strangers,
Right.
literally parent our children from like 6 years old on. And that's what we have to kind of re-examine.
Well,
that may not be the best way to go about it.
America has a really weird infatuation with people with titles and degrees being professionals that we all blindly trust. And part of that has been, I won't say all bad, because there are a lot of people who don't know certain things about a lot of subjects. So a lot of people don't know certain things about the medical industry. So they trust experts to help them make those decisions. But I believe that we've kind of started treating education like we treat the modern car. So you and I were talking a little bit before. When is the last time that you personally, and I'm not talking about your husband, but you personally have checked the oil of your car?
Right. No. Zero.
You haven't for quite a while, because your husband changes the oil in your family's car. Right. And a lot of Americans, they don't check the oil in their car ever. They wait until the light comes on, then they go and have their car serviced, and then they wait until the light comes on again. This is how we treat modern public education. So the reason I think that there's a lot of parents who became so angry in the last couple of years actually doesn't have to do with the fact that education became really bad in the last couple of years. As Gloria Ladson-Billings states, she was actually observing this critical race theory in public K through 12 schools. This is her writing, not mine, in 1995, in a lot of inner city schools, and a lot of how students were to be taught, how she thought things should be flushed out. And the reason is because Americans have let education basically take care of itself. You could afford to be apathetic about the oil of your car, and I can. Back then, that wasn't the way it would be. A man would come home at the end of the week and he would check the oil in his car because he had to. That was a responsibility of every man back in the day, back in the 50s and 60s. Now you don't do that. Well, with education, Generation X, and I love saying this because Generation X would usually get a little salty that I say this. I'm a millennial and people pick at millennials all the time. So you can handle a little criticism.
I'm a Gen Xer. So
cool. So then we'll go into this one full force. A lot of Generation X took a very apathetic approach to their kids' education. A lot of them. So it was put the kid in front of the TV and then send them off to school, and the school will take care of it. As long as the teacher doesn't call me, then we're good. A lot of Generation X did not read kids' homework, did not talk to their kids about their day, gave them a phone when they turned 13 and called it a day.
Right.
Well, then we got shut with our kids in the COVID lockdown, and all of a sudden, parents were forced to look at what was going on in kids' classrooms. They opened the hood of the car, and what did they find? They found a mess. Right. They found an absolute corroded, horrific mess in kids' classrooms, and they didn't like it. And so, and a couple of parents that I've spoken to, especially one from Southern Illinois, I had this conversation with, and I suggested that a lot of this started out as kind of a reaction to being forced to look at it, kind of pulling someone's head and saying, look at it, look what's going on. Because a lot of us in education have been kind of shouting this from the rooftops for years. I mean, I've been studying critical race theory for at least 8 years. But a parent that I spoke to in Southern Illinois was like, honestly, I think I started being really concerned about this because I was kind of embarrassed that I didn't know what was going on in my son's class. And now he's a freshman in high school, and I'm seeing this stuff, and he's, repeating some of this junk. And I heard about it in his English class and his history class, and it's filth.
Right.
I just think that that's probably where a lot of this issue came from. I think that teachers and parents and the education colleges and administrations are quite honestly equally guilty in this. And that's a very hard pill to swallow. And I'm not trying to gaslight parents into like, oh, you guys should feel guilty. No, it's not what I'm saying at all. A lot of great parents in this chat guarantee it. And I'm not saying that every parent of that, but there's a lot of apathy in American education, and it has to stop, because we can't afford to trust public schools to be honest with us anymore. I couldn't with my district in Indianapolis, that's for sure.
Well, I can say as a Gen Xer myself, and my kids are only teenagers now, so I had kids late. But my dad and I grew up pretty much as a latchkey kid. So a lot of us did. A lot of us grew up latchkey kids. And at the time, our parents were either boomers or the generation before boomers. My dad was born in 34, so he was before
The
the
greatest
boom.
generation then. Yeah.
So he was before that. And he was just used to school was school, and
Yep.
and so when I was fortunate enough to go to Montessori, little kids school, and then
Right.
went to public school in 4th grade and so on, but it didn't we lived in a district that was supposed to be like, this great district, and sent me off to school. And I had such a horrible public school education that one of the reasons I decided to become a teacher was that I thought, well, surely I can do better than that.
Right.
Surely I will pay more attention and so forth as a teacher. And then I noticed in graduate school, because they had at University of Pennsylvania that has reading Palafrere, and they had it, and I was the anti-communist from way back. I spent time in Eastern Europe. This was not going to fly with me. So I was a thorn in my professor's sides. I didn't, buy it, went into the schools in Illinois, in fact, was not really welcome there, ended up leaving after only a couple years.
Where in Illinois? I'm curious.
I was in Winnetka.
Oh, okay. I know where that is.
I was in, I was, my elementary school would have fed into New Trier, which we now know is a hotbed of wokeness.
Oh, very much.
And this is this was in late 1990 that I started there. And so, that goes back that far, that they were already doing a lot of the stuff. They were already doing whole word, this 3Q stuff, look, say, and I just wouldn't do it. I was teaching phonics kind of on the sly. And anyway, long story short, I agree with you. It's sort of a qualified agreement, only to say that there are a lot of Gen X parents who I've talked to, I deal with them all day. They are sincerely shocked at how much it's changed from when they were kids. Now, that's not to say it was awesome when they were kids, because it certainly wasn't when I was a kid.
Sure.
But it wasn't great academically. I don't remember politics in the classroom at all. I don't remember any of that. It just was mediocre academically. It wasn't very rigorous. It was certainly more rigorous than like it is now, but it wasn't the greatest. And everybody kind of knew that you would probably prefer the rigor at a private school, which I was fortunate enough to go to later in high school. So I saw the difference in rigor. I saw the difference in depth, but there was zero difference in how much politics. There was no politics. So I think I knew there was politics in the classroom when I had children, because I'd been briefly in the classroom, and I had been in graduate school when they were pushing this critical theory garbage. So I was super hyper vigilant, homeschooled my kids when they were little, and it was only divorce that forced me to put them in the public school. And then I was that parent. I was the parent that, that you wish all the other parents were. Like, why are you doing this? What's going on? Whatever. But as one person all by myself, which a lot of parents are even facing now when they go in groups, I was treated like a crazy person. I was treated like a paranoid conspiracy theorist. Then, when Trump got elected, then I was a racist. I went from being a conspiracy theorist overnight to being a racist. And it was the same me asking the same questions, trying to be the involved parent. And I was shut out or straight up lied to, which is going to get us to our next topic. And so I guess what I'm saying is that I think on balance, you're correct. But I also know that there are a lot of parents who suddenly had the courage, if you will,
that definitely is a part of it,
to say something.
The data that we are seeing, there is a lot of, basically everyone is recognizing what's going on, and there is a lot of empowerment to actually get out and to do things, which is incredibly important. And that's something that cannot be stressed enough. And that's going to be great for the movement. And that's going to be great for actually revitalizing education and steering the direction that it proceeds.
Right. So let's talk a little bit, though, about how parents were misled. So in other words, you're not wrong. The parents were kind of like plug and play. I bought in the right zip code. I should be fine, right? I don't have to check the oil. The red light will come on. And by the way, that also has gone in the past for their kid can't read, because schools had a policy of we don't say anything till 3rd grade. And parents who saw that things were funky, they're like, it doesn't seem like they can read, and I can't help them, and they're frustrated, and they hate life.
But they wouldn't say anything until
and the school's like, no, it's all good, it's fine. And then 3rd grade, your child is in deep trouble, and you're like, why didn't you tell me? Or they don't even tell you then, and they blame the kid. And so I think, it's a combination. There's been a fair amount of gatekeeping and lying and glossing over the dark parts. What have you seen? Because you're on that side and we're on this side. Is that happening, or is it my imagination?
It's not a lot of it's it's kind of just chaos and people running around because they don't know what to do to put out the fire. Right now, the inside of a lot of schools is just people running around because everything is chaotic. The social situation is chaotic. The academic situation is chaotic. All of the other issues, education is a mess. Everyone is running around, they're tired, they're exhausted, they're angry, it's so weird. It kind of reminds me of being a counselor at a camp when, basically you have a group of kids coming and no one's done anything to prepare that they're coming. And it's wild. I think more than anything though, what's made things really interesting in the education system in the last couple of years is that parents have started to take such an active approach in education that they've almost started scaring public schools with their resolve. And that's what's gotten really interesting. So it started making the point where, all right, well, if you guys are going to do this, then I'm just going to take my kid and you're not going to get any of the tax money from my kid because I'm taking him with me. And so that's led a lot of districts to start lying to parents in order to make sure that children are kept within the district.
So it's sort of like an enrollment to keep the enrollments up, to keep the money that would just want to keep people, you don't think it's that they are true believers and they just think the parents are wrong. It's more like we can't let the system implode because
I just wouldn't attribute one motive to all teachers in this case. Like
okay.
Teachers aren't monolithic. This is a big myth that the left throws out there that the right kind of really too often believes. But one teacher might blame the parents. The next teacher doesn't even have time to blame the parents because, they're wondering about all this. The administration just thinks that the approach that teachers aren't using isn't working. The special education teacher thinks all of the kids have disabilities. And it's like, it literally is, it's from classroom to classroom to classroom. It's so wildly different. That to address the problem to the district means you have to address 98 different proximal causes. This is one of the reasons that critical race theory is so dangerous, right? Because it says, well, the proximal cause for 90% of this is white supremacy.
Right. So they're generalizing, but right. I wanted to bring this up to you because I think this is interesting. Jenny's getting inky with it. Says, I think a lot of Gen X parents, especially those who didn't go to college, didn't realize that their classmates were radicalized at college to the degree they are. And I can see that because I was shocked even going from high school into college, where suddenly I was one of 10 in the whole college Republicans. And the whole rest of the school, I'm no longer a Republican, but at the time I was, and it was, Reagan was in office and the rest of the school was burning Reagan in effigy on the quad. Right. And even then in the mid 80s, I was like, what the heck is going on? Right. I mean, I thought we all we had different views, but we wouldn't burn the president in effigy. Like that was such a shock to my system because even the high school I went to, well, I now looking back realized that probably a lot of people were more liberal than I was. I didn't know.
Right.
It wasn't like we just didn't care. It was not a topic of discussion what your political views were. Really, not really. And here it was everything. Like you said, my identity is my, or my politics are my identity. And so if you didn't go to college, and back in those days, it was, likely that 60% of people didn't go to college. Now we don't have that statistic anymore. More people go. But in those days, it wasn't a given that you go to college. So if you didn't, and that just passed you by, and then you had kids of your own, and you put them in school, and now the teachers in the school are the ones that came out of those colleges, it's probably going to be pretty different. So I think she has a good point. I never thought of that.
Yeah, I do. I think the one of the biggest reasons here that we're seeing that we really see this starting in colleges and being funneled to the youth is that it's so easy to captivate the passions of kids. It really is. I mean, any coach will tell you that your team plays differently and acts differently when they have some internal drive. This is why, again, there's the common movie trope that after the main character or the sports team person or someone gets, injured and they're in the hospital, the whole team plays just amazingly. And it's great because the kids have something to fight for. Well, right. In the United States, we all have our panem et circuses. We have our bread and our entertainment. And so people need something to fight for. Well, right. This is something that's really addictive and it's really easy to kind of break kids into. And you can create a lot of really angry Orwellian hate that fumes and propagates and is, to a degree, it's not self-sustaining because it eats everything else, but it keeps itself lit.
Right.
It keeps the fire alive because it subsists on hate, and in youth that's very easy to cultivate. And so that's one of the reasons that it's being brought down from the university to K through 12 is because, yeah, you can change a classroom by making it political. You can change the whole thing. And
Right.
you're looking to create change in education. Well, if you can't get academic change, well, then at least I can get social change or passionate, discourse and something. And that's where that occurs. You can get
Right.
engagement via hate. That's one of the most powerful ways to get engagement in a classroom.
Now, but to your point earlier, rather than indict all the teachers, and that's what they're conspiring or wanting to do you think they've been captured, many of them, and don't realize that's what they're doing? Do you think they sincerely think they're helping?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would more often attribute problems to naivety than malice. There are some that think they're just on a great social justice crusade. It's their religion, right? It's their passion. You can dabble in activism and not really believe it, but after a while, it'll kind of start to snake its tendrils around you. There are a lot of biological factors that your brain will look for. For example, when you look at people in the hallway, your brain's reaction is to smile. It's a sign of saying, "Hey, I'm sane. Talk to me. Accept me." So activism is basically hyper norming that you are sane on steroids. So it's like you're constantly checking for facial cues and signals and validation and encouragement. And so, within regard to the woke framework, that's all it is. It's this
Right.
constant source of religious and family-esque validation. This is one of the reasons you see them preening about cutting off their own family and their faith, because it's a communication to the larger group zoologically of saying, "Look, I have left this group for you. Therefore, you should give me validation and love." And that's what I'm seeking. That's what those
Mhm.
groups are seeking. I think that they think they're helping kids because they're inviting them to be a part of the club.
Yeah, and it just feels like it's a weird kind of club because they don't have anything constructive to offer. There's a lot of they will even say we're deconstructing. We're
Yeah, yeah, it's
deconstructing
all
all
about the
kinds of
tearing.
things.
It's all about the tearing down. I think that the right suffers from this too a little bit. So the right's currently trying to tear down public schools, and the left is currently trying to tear down Western civilization. Both of them suffer from the same problem, although the right is trying to tear down something smaller and less impactful on all of our lives, whereas the
Yeah.
left is trying to tear down literally the entire framework of culture. The left doesn't actually have anything other than the false same sense of utopia that's never ever worked that they're
Mhm.
trying to substitute. The right is starting to learn to actually talk about what school choice looks like on the other side. And
Mhm.
so I think that the right is winning in the conversation of deconstruction here, whereas the left is literally just going around angrily in anything that possibly has any vestiges to Western civilization, tearing it apart.
Mhm.
And so they're tearing it apart so fast they're eating themselves. So this is the
Mhm.
third wave feminism versus transgenderism thing, which is so funny to watch.
Mhm.
It's the person who came out and said, "Well, I'm actually trans Korean," and then watching that whole thing ensue. It's the pedophilia thing coming out of the
Right.
LGBTQ movement. I mean, there's just so many things. It's like they're running so fast they don't even realize they've already tripped over themselves and are falling towards the ground, and they're going to be
Right.
trampled by the next person behind them.
And it would be funnier if there weren't small children caught in the mix. And
And
that's the part
parents
that
being lied to in the process.
right. Exactly. Exactly. And describe to me though when for example, you came out the other day and I sort of used the term came out intentionally on Twitter and you had this video about that topic. Can you explain to the audience like what you said and what happened?
Yeah. So, starting at the beginning of this year, the Indianapolis Public School District, Dr. Henderson's office, and she's one of our chief, grand, awesome, super duper administrators. She sent out a letter to the principals, an email that was sent to other district staff that says, if a parent asks you for teaching critical race theory, look at this FAQ so you can give them the right answers, the district approved answers. And the question, I opened it up, and it said, "Are we teaching critical race theory?" No, we're not. And then literally the next thing is, "But we are teaching racial equity." Blah 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 blah, and like an entire 2 or 3 pages of how Indianapolis views racial equity, which is straight out of critical race theory and really Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectional views of critical race theory. But I kind of let it go for a little bit. I was mad, but I was like, you know what? Like I'm just going to do my best to kind of like do what I can while I'm here, and then maybe not renew my contract next year. That was kind of what I was thinking. And then on October the 18th, we had a professional development that was required for the whole district. And Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, I saw her again. And I hadn't seen her since I was in college, or excuse me, when I was Governor Walker's junior ed policy advisor, and I was sitting in her classes, and I was like, oh, this ought to be good. I wonder if she's going to say some more slurs about Asians. And instead, she just proceeded to say all teaching is political, critical race theory is great, blah, 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 did the whole thing. And then the PDs throughout the rest of the day contain this racial equity office garbage, including saying that critical race theory is really good and there's a reason that we use it as a pedagogy in our classrooms. And that really upset me because now I had very concrete evidence. We are specifically teaching critical race theory to our kids as a pedagogy, not as curriculum, but as praxis, as things in practice.
Right.
And then we're turning around. We know we're lying to parents because we're saying critical race theory. We know we're using it. We know, right. And we're lying to parents. Exactly. I was like, no, that's not good. And to really push me over the edge, one of my other staff members, who is kind of a step above teacher, she's what's called a math interventionist. She had all of these tweets on her Twitter, which had 17,000 followers, including a lot of people in the district. And she's saying all of this horrific racist nonsense. She's like calling all Hispanic people she doesn't like white. She's calling black people she doesn't like the C word. She's saying that black and white students should not be allowed to hang out together at the University of Kentucky and colleges in general. And she was like yelling at parents for letting black and white kids spend time together. You can see all of this a little bit further back on my Twitter. And just a really terrible person. She'd never been called into the HR office like I had when I tweeted that Rush Limbaugh passed away. She's still regurgitating all of this racist filth. So now I'm sitting and looking at a double standard, and parents are being lied to. So I kind of got all of my information together for the first little bit here that showed that they were lying, and I released it. And it went a little place, it went somewhere. And then after Youngkin's victory, I'm seeing all of these Democrats on the media again. And they're saying not only is critical race theory not taught in schools, or not only is critical race theory just history, which it isn't. Not only is it not taught in schools, which it is, but it doesn't even exist. It's not even real. Critical race theory just is this magical 3 words.
A boogeyman made up by Chris Rufo. He just made it up.
Right. And so that was it. I was done. So I sat right here, and one morning I was like, no, look, I am an administrator in the Indianapolis Public School District, and we're teaching critical race theory, and we're lying to you about doing it. Here's critical race theory, and here's where it comes from. So I cited 3 books. Literally in the titles are critical race theory and how they're fleshed out. Most of my colleagues have never read any of those books in their entirety. Even the stuff that they read, though, like Elena Aguilar's Coaching for Equity, she openly cites and encourages critical race theory in the book and how we're supposed to coach our teachers to use critical race theory in class. And I sent that out, and, a lot of people picked it up, and a lot of people were sharing it around. And a lot of people were basically just sharing that, yeah, I'm inside the district, and yes, we're doing it. And I don't like that we're lying to parents. At the very least, own it and say, we believe this is good. Don't lie to parents. That pisses me off.
Exactly. Because as you said, they're saying it's just history. So like first they say it's just history, but we're not doing it in schools. So you're not teaching history in schools. And then the next breath, they're like, we just want to teach a true history. Why do you have such a problem with the true history? And like, who said we did? And by the way, who defines what is true? Like where did you get the idea that like you own that definition and it's different from anything that we would perceive as true? Like, I missed that memo. And, and so on.
It's just really frustrating, but it's also kind of funny because the left as a collective cannot agree on what critical race theory is. Now, I personally think this is somewhat intentional. And the reason I think it's intentional is because the minute you decide what critical race theory is and you label it, Republicans can fight it. The second that everyone universally agrees that this is what it is, then we can fight it. But instead, they have done something in an attempt to kind of play a safe game. They've done something worse. They have inadvertently, someone has to define what critical race theory is. And their own authors, through the communication of many, right-wing and conservative groups, have told everyone what critical race theory is. And unfortunately, while some things are being swept under the umbrella of critical race theory, and which is annoying and a whole other thing, Critical race theory is being called out for the gross nonsense that it is.
Right. Exactly. How would you define it? So if you could give the definition that people could walk around and use, and say, you don't even know what critical race theory is, what would you say?
So critical race theory is a particular way of thinking about race and racism that first developed at Harvard Law School from the late 1970s through the 1990s. It stated its objective question was to question whether the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act legislation actually improved the racial situation in Western nations. So, especially in the United States. The real objective of critical race theory is to reorganize social, cultural, and legal playing field in a way that claims to reverse these historical injustices around the issues of race, allegedly without reproducing them. That's from James Lindsay. In a common context in schools, here's what I say that critical race theory is. It's a lens. So critical race theory, by and large, is not curriculum. I mean, it can be, just as you in education college, remember they taught us about formal and informal assessments.
Right.
Well, how many times did you sit down with your class and say, okay, class, today we're going to learn about formal and informal assessments? No, you never did, but you used those in class.
I also didn't teach them Bloom's taxonomy.
Right,
I also
exactly.
Didn't teach,
but I still was trying to elevate their order of thinking to synthesis. Bingo. Right. Couldn't have said it better myself. Actually, I'm going to start using that example from now on. Yeah. Great example.
It's one I've seen a lot of people use. I mean, from Robert Pondiscio to
I love Pondiscio.
Yeah, so they're different people, and then of course today we had Frank McCormick explain that when you go to the doctor's office, the doctor doesn't say, well, now I'm going to use the scientific method to assess what is wrong with you, right? They're just using it, and that's how they're diagnosing, and that's what they're doing.
Right. So
they're doing that with critical theory.
Right. So critical theory as a whole is a lens, it's a pedagogy, it's how you teach. And it's a way that you basically get your students to question the cause of everything and apply it to what you feel is a larger societal context. So critical theory, if it's critical race theory, it's basically attributing everything in the United States that's any kind of a problem to white supremacy, to white whatever, fill in the blank. If it's critical gender theory, then it's the problem with the straights and the problem with men and toxic masculinity. And if it's, and all of them are boiled down to Marxism, because it's the idea that individualism does not exist and it is the collective being oppressed and the other collective doing the oppressing that is the problem. That is the very common core of critical theory in general, which of course was perpetrated by individuals like, Herbert Marcuse.
Right. Right. And the thing is, and James Lindsay makes this point, it's Marxian, it's not Marxist, in the sense that even the socialists, for example, have taken issue with critical race theory because it has a tendency to throw the working class under the bus.
Yeah. I mean,
they're infighting, it's like
all of socialism and communism ends up screwing over the working guy at the end of the day. But I mean, humorously, and James and I have talked about this a little bit, but yeah, I mean, the cultural Maoist revolution, the idea that you had to get rid of the four olds and all of the common cultures to create something new and utopian.
It feels more similar to me. But
yeah, I do. I would actually, he has studied this a lot more than I have, and I respect where he's coming from. So I don't know if I'm going to get into the argument of differentiating between Marxian and Marxist. Marx is at the very common point of it. I used to think that part was a conspiracy theory, by the way. I always thought it was racial nonsense. It was not until I sat through racial equity training at IPS that I actually saw them say, well, we don't use the term white privilege anymore as just talking about privilege, because it takes away from the oppression of like poor white Appalachian and poor white Southern people. And I was like, oh my God, this is actually Marxist. And they
must have gotten with the socialists and had a chat, because that was
to talk
their
about all of the evils and sins of individualism and called it all white. So it's a racial criticism of capitalism, liberty, and Western civilization, Protestantism.
Right. And Jason Littlefield, who I've spoken with a few times about social emotional learning and how it's changed from something that had the potential to be good, especially with at-risk kids, to something that's just another Trojan horse for this garbage. And they're using it with all kids and all classes and so on. Not to mention a little data mining thrown in the mix. He calls it successor ideology,
right?
Is what he calls it. So,
and it really is. It's so weird. I mean, it's so filled with junk that no wonder it's so hard to pin down and just get rid of once and for all, because it's really infected the broader American culture for 40 to 50 years. And I do believe that one of the origin points is Berkeley. When we started to say that collective Marxism was something like, we widened the Overton window to make that like acceptable. I'm not saying you shouldn't be able, like, if you want to be a Marxist, I'm not saying you should, that I'm not suggesting you should have the freedom of speech to say that. I do say that the culture should look at you and collectively say, you're an idiot. You're an idiot for believing that. And I'm
Columbia
not going to
Teachers
pretend
College.
that you're not, because I'm, Columbia, again, E.D. Hirsch Jr., Columbia Teaching College, 1920s. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of the things I tell parents, like, what can I do? How can I ask? What questions should I ask? I said, well, I would start with, is it your view that the United States of America is inherently racist? At its core, that we are a racist country, that our founding documents were conceived by racists for the purpose of perpetuating, white supremacy. Is that your worldview as an educator? So if you're talking to a teacher, a superintendent, a principal, whatever, just ask them point blank that question. It's a yes or no question. It's not, there's no nuance there. Is it inherently racist? I'm not asking you if it's at all racist, if racism still exists somewhere in the country. I'm asking you if these statements are true or not true. And, I can answer that. No, it's not. But the critical theorist, or the person who is losing that lens, is going to at least stammer and stutter and beg you for some room to be nuanced or whatever, or simply
nuance.
say yes.
My favorite education buzzword.
Right. So they're gonna throw that in. There really isn't any nuance, because when we use the words like inherently, and we use words like, or if we say in its DNA, if we say is it in the founding document, were they written to perpetuate white supremacy? If your answer is, it's either yes or no, why were they written? And anybody goes, well, it was a little bit. No, it was not a little bit of any of that. In fact, the seeds for abolition, the seeds for anti-racism were in those documents. They were signed in part by some abolitionists.
And done regrettably so, with the understanding that there were problems at play that they saw. Yes, they saw it as a societal ill. They also saw it as something to address. Many of them also thought that it would be errantly so, I will admit, although again, I'm saying through naivety and not through malice. A lot of them thought and wrote, we're just going to solve slavery right after the Revolutionary War. We'll solve it and we'll be done with it. Now, a lot of people are like, that's because they were evil white men. It's like, no, they were just naive.
Right.
That's a lot more palatable and a lot more honest. Again, a lot of people want to say that a lot of the historical ills that have plagued communities, which do exist, are the result of just huge amounts of evil and spite and malice, when a lot of it is definitely related to naivety. Unfortunately, naivety is not generationally damnable. You can't apologize for someone else being naive. That's not your problem. You have enough problems, assigning, again, I don't blame modern, descendants of the Japanese for bombing Pearl Harbor. I don't blame Arab children for 9/11. Goodness gracious, I don't even blame one of the Osama bin Laden's family members is a stinking conservative because, she's his sister. I don't blame her for the horrible stuff that he did. It's nonsense. And that's with malice. That's not with naivety, right? Those examples.
Right. Exactly.
So there's a biblical concept for this. It's called the children who've sharpened their teeth on sour grapes. And it's the children of Israel that wanted to whine and complain that all of their problems were because of their parents. And they had to go around saying that we can't do anything because our parents, and we're just sad and ashamed and angry. And basically the Lord made fun of them because it was really silly. I mean, it almost carries the same weight as when Jonah's whining about the city not being destroyed. And the Lord says, dost thou well to be angry? It's childish.
Right. Exactly. And I've said before on this channel, when you talk about, I'm a victim or I'm oppressed, and like I've said, so what?
Well, this is the fun part of it, though.
Like,
no one
now
mentions
what are you going to do about it?
So flip it over on the like kind of the Democrat main line. So when you look at the distinction between President Barack Obama's first run for office for presidency and then his second term, originally President Obama criticized critical race theory in his first run. He talked about the dangers of victimhood complexes and the dangers of critical theory, suggesting that the entire country was against him. And he said, no, the entire country has put me in this place to bring us forward. Now, a little naive in the direction he wanted to take us, but his criticism of that victimization was right. That was not in his second run for office. The second run for office was very critical race theory aligned. In fact, he actually pulls a quote from Crenshaw in one of his rallies. I can't remember the specific state, so I'm not going to make a guess here. So it's really interesting when you look at critical race theory. It's been involved in United States culture for a very long time, and it's really saturated a lot of environments. Funnily enough, Indianapolis and Chicago are two of the hot spots for it, as is Madison, Wisconsin.
Right. I think I tend to agree with Mega Juanita here that he was conning us. I think that he's very smart and he was very well trained for the role that he was playing, and he knew good and well there's no way, especially with the questions about his origin and so forth, that he could get away with supporting it in his first run, but that he could do it in his second. He also said that marriage was between a man and a woman before he was elected the first time. So there were a few things that he said that he suddenly didn't believe anymore.
I would suggest that a lot of it is that it's political convenience and what it was convenient for him to say at the time. And in his original runs for office, he said a lot more because he repeated it, and because he repeated it organically. So there's the cool, I mean, as you know, in education, the organic concept of if a child tells you a story and they tell it to you slightly different, but it's the same themes coming through, then it's likely true. But if a child tells you the exact same story word for word every time, it's probably false because it's scripted. Mm-hmm. And in his first run for office, and I'm not a fan of, former President Barack Obama at all. I'm very much rooted against him back when I was just a lad watching the election returns. But as far as his first run is concerned, I think he genuinely did believe a lot of things that he said regarding that, regarding at least individualism in the case of individualism within the collective, which is basically like light democratic bureaucratic gobbledygook, but again, rejecting the victimhood complex. By the time he came around, it was politically convenient for him to follow every talking point of the DNC and like the inner city coalition movements. So like when you look at that, I don't want to get into a lot, but I guess that's maybe my distinction in play of it is the first time he's still a little naive, right? He's still a little bright-eyed and he's speaking from the heart. 2011, 2012 rolls around. Nah, he's reading from the script.
I guess you might be right. I can't get past a radio show he did in Chicago when he was state senator, and he was asked about the Constitution because remember he pitched that he was this constitutional scholar, and he was asked about it, and he said that it was a document of negative rights. And he seemed to be lamenting that it doesn't give the federal government enough power to do things for good. In other words, it doesn't allow them enough latitude to pursue the common good. It's a document of negative rights. What the government's not permitted to do. And he argued that we have not made sufficient progress.
That's a very inner city culture way of viewing the national paradigm. And there's a really interesting study. There's actually, you know what? No, to break that wide open, go look at inner city culture paradigm and a lot of stuff that came out of the University of Chicago. A lot of the inner city culture's framework of us versus them dynamics and how power is to be wielded. It's very, very interesting. It can be a little dry as far as reading is concerned, but there are a couple of good commentaries out there. And I believe that at one time, I'd say back in 2011, 2012, Glenn Beck was recommending reading up on the study. I don't know where to point you to off the top of my head. I don't have any of those books next to me.
I'll look into it. But you're right. We don't want to go too far into that, but I just think it certainly highlights your point that we as a country are not a monolith. Right. And, the way that students are living insofar as, what they might need for schooling or education is not a monolith. And the fact that we have made the system into a monolith is a big part of the problem. It's not all of the problem, but it certainly is a big part of it. And now we have this growing chaos in that system, and parents are waking up to that, I think. But
I definitely agree. They're definitely waking up to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what would you suggest that parents do moving forward?
So kind of wrapping up my thoughts, I think I might have to kind of bail out in a second or two. I hear my my pregnant wife rummaging around in the kitchen.
No, that's fine. That's why I was kind of getting to like,
oh yeah. What I think parents should do, Tony? First of all, I would ask, what is your goal? Because if you're and like, what's the cause to the effect? If your kid's running around and saying a bunch of weird stuff, like weird sexual stuff that you don't like, a bunch of weird like left-wing stuff that you don't like, the first place that you should turn to before you ever tackle the classroom is the phone. The phone, the phone, the phone. Opening up Snapchat. I've said this before. I will continue to harp on it. Opening up Snapchat and literally swiping left to the news page where kids will go all the time will bring up more hot garbage of the highest degeneracy, or I should say the lowest degeneracy that you could possibly find. So that's primo uno place where kids are getting their junk. If you've heard something in class, you've seen some kind of worksheet, you're a little concerned, etc., I would suggest first that you talk to the teacher, because in cases, and I have seen this before, a lot of parents have spoken to teachers. Teachers have been incredibly transparent, and the parent walks away happy and satisfied. That's a good conclusion. I mean, if you had a suspicion and you went to school and that suspicion was abated, awesome. I mean, that's a teacher you should support in the future. I loved my parents. I had great relationships with my parents. I always told them what I was doing in my classroom. I always told them what was going on, my concerns. The teachers union never took care of me. They never even sent me a little basket of fudge in the spring, which is what they supposedly did, I guess. I don't know. No one ever really cared for me like my parents did. So I would say, talk to your teachers. You find a teacher that's being a little rough and aggravating and etc., go to the principal. Talk to the principal about that teacher. If the principal does not do anything about that teacher and your concerns, then you go to the superintendent. You say, hey, look, you've got a principal who's not holding this teacher accountable, etc., etc., etc. Then you don't go to the school board. Don't go scream in a microphone. School board's not there to hear you. They don't care. They don't want to sit there and listen to you. They're not, you come in and give a passionate speech. You're not going to change minds and hearts. That's not how people's work anymore.
Thank you, Tony, for backing me up.
Yeah.
I've been saying that on the channel and people are like, but Deb, and I'm like,
walk you into corners. People go into school board meetings and they're like, oh, I'm here to argue about, and then they open up their book and they're like, I'm here to argue about masks and critical race theory and SEL and REI and DEI and food in the lunchroom. And my kid had a smelly nose the other day. And also my kid can't read. And they get done ranting and they expect, first of all, no one's going to take you seriously if you just give, a huge garbage list. That's not what it's for. And the school board's just going to address your concern anyway with we're looking at this. Right. Don't do that. Elect a better school board. That's my answer.
Yes, exactly. Elect a better school board. And remember what the school board can and cannot do in the first place. So going and yelling at them about things that aren't even their purview is a big waste of everyone's time. Yeah. And you're now, as you pointed out before the show, they've got you on camera. They've recorded your voice. They've got your picture.
The left will act stupid on their own. We do not need that guy who I was so frustrated. That guy they filmed outside in Virginia, and the left is looking for people to say this. They're like, okay, hey, why are you voting for Glenn Youngkin? And he said education. And they're like, what about education? And then the guy said CRT. And they're like, okay, what do you know about CRT? And he's like, well, I don't know anything about it, but I've heard it's pretty bad. Don't be that person. Don't give the left any ammunition. Just don't do it. Don't just, elect a better school board. Let them fire the superintendent.
Right.
Take it.
Keep it local, go to the teacher, and I say that as a person who's tried it and failed, like where the teacher basically said, get lost. But I still am glad I tried. That was the right way to go.
Right.
And you document that and you move your way up the food chain. And, ultimately you have to also make a choice that if you're not getting answers that you like, it is your responsibility. As Tony says, it's there is going to come a point where you have to draw a line and say, okay, my kid's got to be there today and tomorrow and the next day. And so if I'm really that dissatisfied, I have to think about what I want to do for my child, because you're not going to fix the system with all the yelling and the screen. It's just not going to happen. I'm not saying don't try to do something and affect change. I'm just saying be realistic about what kind of change you can affect in that time frame for your kid. Your kid comes before whatever goal you have for the system. That's been my rallying cry.
This is why I'm not as a fan of activists as I am of just parents getting things done.
Exactly.
I'm not interested in you going out doing showboating in front of buildings and yelling at people. You're not empowering people. You're annoying people. Don't be those people. Don't chase kids that are wearing masks. Don't do that. Make positive and effective changes. I wrote about this for the Daily Caller. I've met the domestic terrorists, so-called. And most of them are great parents that are just trying to make decent changes. They just need the resources that are effective, and they need to know what's actually out there and what's basically getting them gaslit by the left.
Right. And you have gone a long way to helping us understand what that is. So I thank you so very much. And I want to let you go back to your family and your life. Everybody, please follow Tony on Twitter. And he is at, make sure I get this right. You are at
The Tonus, Thetonus. Everyone tells me I need to know a more professional handle now that I'm getting media attention, but I just can't shake the old college nicknames. So that's at TheTonus. Actually, though, realistically, go follow the Chalkboard Review. That's at Chalkboard Rev across all social media. It's thechalkboardreview.com. That's where you're going to find all the good stuff, all of my colleagues that are doing really cool things, and all of the other teachers and parents that are helping us get resources out there.
Okay, so at Chalkboard Rev.
Yep, that's the one.
That's where you guys want to go. All right. There are some great creators out there, everyone. So you do need to follow. And you can also follow the Tonus.
Oh, TONUS.
TONUS. I'm sorry. My bad.
Tonas. Ooh, that
The
sounds Italian.
Tonus.
Tonosity.
The Tonus. Okay. All right. So thank you for taking this time to talk with me. Thanks to everyone who came today to listen to this conversation. Please share out the replay for others who missed it, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, and thanks to the chat as well. I really enjoyed reading some of your comments, and they definitely shaped some of my answers. So you guys take care.
Thanks a lot, everybody.